M135i took the hot hatch world by storm in 2012 when it was first released. It was a rear-wheel drive, very powerful car that sat amongst a plethora of front-wheel drive hot hatches. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at why the 135 and the latest and last model, the 140i, is a dying breed of car that we will never see again. So hot hatches are incredibly popular, especially here in the UK, and you can completely understand why. You're usually taking a relatively small, compact, affordable car and shoving a powerful, usually turbocharged engine up to the front of the car, powering them front wheels. Now that has been the formula for a long time now, arguably pioneered and mastered by Volkswagen with their GTI range of cars. Now the M135i came along in 2012 and completely broke that mould. It entered the market with a rear-wheel drive chassis and 315 brake horsepower. And to put that into perspective, Audi's flagship model, the RS3, was only putting out 335 brake horsepower, so this car was only 20 brake horsepower down. Now BMW have continued with that recipe all the way until 2019 with the car behind me, the M140i. Now this brings me on to the point of today's video, which is why this recipe, which is adored by many across the world, is going to be no more. Okay, so enough speaking about the history and the background of the car. I've got the keys in my pocket, so let's take this car on the road. So the best way to experience these cars is to drive them, whether it's a 6-cylinder burble that you hear when you're pulling away, or the rear wheel slipping slightly. If you're on a bit of an uneven surface, you can definitely tell it's a bit of a different beast. From the very second you set off, you will realise that this is a completely different experience. As soon as you start putting your foot on that throttle, you do realise that you are being pushed from the rear. Now when this car was released, it was criticised for its lack of LSD and its dual clutch transmission at the time. However, as you guys know, or may not know, you can get the optional LSD, which is from M Performance, and you can also get the ZF gearbox, which is absolutely fantastic. The car we are driving in today has the factory Michelin Pilot Super Sports, and whilst if you're in a dry, hot climate, these tyres are absolutely fantastic. If you are in the British weather as we are today and it's a slight bit greasy or slightly damp, you do struggle to put the power down. Being a 6-cylinder engine, you do get bags and bags of torque from really low down in the rev range, but it's when you start pushing on through that rev range where these cars come alive. Now regardless of what iteration of engine you have, whether it's the N54, the N55 or the B58 as I have in this car, the fun is when you are pushing on and the car just pulls relentlessly. So I mentioned that you can get these cars in 3 different types of engines depending on the age that you're going for. The first edition of the 135i came with the N54 engine, the 3-litre straight 6 engine. Now, as I mentioned, that car was criticised for its gearbox, which wasn't exactly great. Now, if we take a look at the N55 engine, which was available on the 135i's from around 2013, them cars had the option to get the M Performance LSD, and they also had the ZF 8-speed gearbox, which is a gearbox I have in this car, and I must say it's absolutely fantastic. It's also worth noting that the N55 engine is also in the first edition of the M2, and in the M2 it's putting around 360 brake horsepower. Now if you've got a 135i, you can modify them to get quite a bit of power straight off of the bat. You know, with some simple modifications you can be running 400 brake horsepower, and in reality when you think about it, 400 brake horsepower in a rear-wheel drive daily-build car is actually quite a lot. So one particular criticism that I have of these cars, and it's shared amongst quite a few other car reviewers and also owners that have them, is that the chassis could be a little bit stiffer. Now the first thing that I noticed when I jumped into this car coming from the GT86 is that it had quite a bit of body roll. Now don't get me wrong, the chassis in this car is going to be suitable for the majority of people. However, if you want a bit of a stiffer ride, a bit more of a driver feel, then I would recommend getting some springs, some coilovers, some M4 LCAs and maybe the underbody brace from the 235i, all of which will help stiffen the car up and will give it a bit more of a response. Now moving on to the main point of this actual video then, why this car is a breed of car that we're not going to see anymore. Now, it's more often than not that manufacturers are downsizing engines. Take a look at AMG taking away the V8s that they've had, replacing them with the V6 bi-turbos. Have a look at BMW replacing this car with the F40, which is a 2-cylinder 4-wheel drive. The Fiesta ST, for example, was a 1.6 turbo. Now it's gone down to a 1.5 3-cylinder. And I think this is just purely down to the emissions. Obviously, Volkswagen got caught out with the emissions scandal, which I think has sort of propelled a lot of manufacturers into thinking, well, we need to downsize our engines. Now, I've mentioned this in my previous video, which was released last week. In no way, shape or form do I think BMW have taken away the 3-litre engine purely to punish the owners. If you look at it from a commercial perspective, where they're talking about emissions and things like that, and trying to level the emissions across the range, and it makes complete sense. Now, can you still buy a relatively small and fast car from BMW? Yes, of course you can. You've got the M2 Competition, which is a car that I've driven, and I must say it's an absolute animal of a car. Now, the only difficulty that brings is that the M2 Competition is much more expensive than the car we're sat in today. Now, in the main, if you were to get a base spec M140i and compare that to the price of a base spec M2 Competition, you're looking at nearly double the cost. Now, when you start to consider the price differences between the two cars, it presents a bit of a problem. Now, double the cost might be okay for some people, but double the cost may also put the M2 Competition out of reach for quite a few. Of course, over time, the prices of the M2 Competition and the original M2 will start to come down, and it very much depends on what type of car you're looking for. If you're looking for the sound of a car, then I would recommend the first edition of the M2, purely because it's got the N55 engine, and the general consensus is that the N55 sounds a lot better than the S55, which is in the M2 Competition. Now, if we start to take a bit of a holistic view at the competitors for the M140i and the previous M135i, you start to look at things like the Golf GTI, the Golf R, the Audi S3, more recently the A45 AMG, the A35 AMG, all of which have switched to all-wheel drive. Now, at the beginning of this video, I was talking about Volkswagen and their recipes for success with the front-wheel drive hot hatch. Now, they pretty much dominated that sector for a long time. The Mark 5 GTI, the Mark 6 GTI, and the Mark 6 GTI finished around 2009, and then they brought out the Mark 6R, the 265 brake horsepower all-wheel drive rocket. Now, I think that was the turning point of hot hatches. I think a lot of manufacturers started to see that all-wheel drive was the way forward. Of course, Volkswagen continued that with the Mark 7R, which is another fantastic car, and then all of the other manufacturers started to jump in with the all-wheel drive hot hatches. Now, quite a few people have said that BMW have made the changes that they have in 2019 because it's a case of, if you can't beat them, join them. Now, I don't think that's the case whatsoever, because the M135i, the M140i, the M2, they all bring something different to the table. If you don't want an all-wheel drive hot hatch, if you don't want a front-wheel drive hot hatch, then what are your options? If you don't want a Golf R, if you don't want an Audi S3, and you want something rear-wheel drive, BMW are the only manufacturer to actually offer that. Now, whilst I can't speak for BMW and the reasonings why they've made the changes that they have, and as good as the all-wheel drive F40 is and as good as the competitors are, I just think that them cars lack the flair, they lack the unique nature, and they lack the unique selling point of what the M135i and the M140i have to offer. So, wrapping up this video then, it's quite difficult and quite sad for me to say that we're probably not going to get another rear-wheel drive hot hatch from BMW, and here's hoping that BMW reinvent the M140i moving forward. Maybe they bring out a hyper hatch, maybe they bring out an all-wheel drive hyper hatch or a rear-wheel drive one. Now, if you take a look at some of the more recent M Division models, you will notice that they have switchable systems. So the M5 Competition, for example, you can switch it between all-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive. Now, if BMW resurrect the M140i with a 400 brake horsepower motor with the switchable all-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive system, it will be the best of both worlds. All the people who like all-wheel drives will be able to scratch their itch, and all the people who want the rear-wheel drive when they need it can turn a toggle, and then bam, you're in rear-wheel drive, you can drift, you can have fun, and you can have more fun on the track than you would do in an all-wheel drive chassis. And I think that's it for today's video, guys. I'd be quite interested in finding out your thoughts and your opinions on whether BMW should resurrect the M140i, and if they do, should they include that switchable all-wheel drive system? So if you're going down a road and maybe it's a little bit icy, maybe it's a little bit rainy, would you then have it in an all-wheel drive format? But then if you're going onto the track or taking it on a brisk country road or something like that, would you then turn it into a rear-wheel drive car? Let me know down in the comments, I'd be quite interested to hear that. Now of course, if you have enjoyed this video, remember to like it, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with other BMW owners, and of course if you want to support the channel moving forward, hit that red subscribe button just down below. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.